Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this cold last day of winter. And thank you, Amy, for your kind introduction. And congratulations to JASA for your 50th anniversary, which pretty much paralleled my 50-year career in the museum, where I started in 1972. Research on the highlights helped us to focus on some issues that every curator and collector deals with, and that are things like provenance, connoisseurship, conservation, discoveries of new fields of collecting. As you're all probably aware, the Philadelphia, we got ahead of ourselves here. Started with the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition, one of the world's fairs that introduced Americans to Japanese art. The building on the left was the art gallery for the exhibition, and it was built with the intention of becoming the permanent holding collection for the Pennsylvania Museum and School of Industrial Design as we started out. And to the right will be the more familiar building that houses the collections today, opened in 1926, and the museum was renamed the Philadelphia Museum of Art in 1934. The World's Fairs were, of course, one of the driving forces in introducing Japanese art to American audiences. After the centennial, there was the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, and then 1904, the Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis. And it is from that exhibition that this first pair of temple lions that are on the screen were acquired. They were brought to the St. Louis exhibition by a private individual, Japanese, a Mr. K. Sano, who attributed them to the famous sculptor Unkei, but alas, it would have been a posthumous work, probably early 14th century, but a wonderful example of Buddhist sculpture in the naturalistic Kamakura style with the yosegi joint wood technique. Mr. Sano not only brought the Kumainu to the World's Fair, he brought an entire temple gate that you see here, and it was purchased from the exposition from Mr. Sano by two Philadelphians who brought it to Fairmount Park and had it erected at the site of what was the Japanese bazaar during the centennial and near what is now the Junzo Yoshimura Shofuso Japanese house. The temple gate came equipped with the central figure there, a Hokan Shaka, and many other sculptures and Buddhist works. On the extreme right of each picture, you can see faintly the sculptures that I've mentioned. And on the right, you see them installed in the first museum building, Memorial Hall, in a sort of altar-like setting. The interest in Buddhism, of course, was strong among Americans at that time. Think of Bigelow and Fenollosa in Boston. And of course, these things became available because of the economic downturn for the Buddhist temples, which had to rely on sales of their art objects to survive. This temple, thanks to Mr. Sano's brochure, which indicated the name of the temple as Sei-onji, we were able in 1989 to trace the temple, which is still extant in Ibaraki Prefecture. And the head priest Mr. Kurihara Sokatsu, actually showed us this Meiji period print, which has the same central Hokan Shaka figure and two of the guardians. The note on the side there says that it went to the Eikoku Daie Hakubutsukan, but in fact, it came to Philadelphia. Another perhaps most rewarding element of my retirement was that my colleagues and advisory committee allowed me one last dream wish item that they purchased for the museum. My background is in Japanese literature, and so I naturally tended toward calligraphy as an area of interest, especially the poetry, both Chinese and Japanese. And I have to acknowledge the connoisseurship and enthusiasm of my colleague, Dr. Kyoko Kinoshita, who identified this piece and used her diplomatic skills to convince its owner that it should come to Philadelphia. Ryokan was a calligrapher I've long admired. He, of course, was himself an admirer of Ike Taiga, but his works are not available, and there are also always authenticity questions. But this fabulous screen, which consists of 5 Chinese poems translated in a book by Jonathan Chaves, but you can see the wonderful kind of nervous energy and spontaneity of his brushwork and the subtle inking that makes his reputation so well deserved. This poetry mostly deals with his life as a monk, going out begging in the village nearby, the hut where he spent the last decade of his life. There's always, as with Taiga and Literati and other Zen artists, a certain amount of mythologizing about their life based on their poetry and their work, and the same is true of Ryokan. Even into the 20th century, on the right is an album leaf by Kosugi Hoan, who depicts Ryokan dancing and playing with the village children. I think every curator is, especially of a large collection, guilty to some extent of benign neglect of some areas of the collection. And I have to confess that for me, it was our sword collection. But thanks to a grant for a conservation survey and the research efforts of Dr. Harrison Schley, who was a research associate with the museum at the time, we were able to identify some of the most important pieces, and this is one that will be appearing in the book the entry written by Dr. Schley. The swords are, of course, noted for their beautiful steel blades, and this is complete with an open iron tsuba and gilt fittings. Very beautiful piece and highly considered among aficionados of swords. You can see that the accession date is 1964, but in fact they were collected by the grandfather of the donor, Edmund Gray Zielinski, in 1895 and 96, when he was in Japan on business for the Bethlehem Iron Works, now Bethlehem Steel Works, and it's kind of the post-Yatoi generation. They were no longer going to teach Japan, they were coming to do business in Japan and to learn possibly from the sword makers about steel manufacturing. Zielinski purchased about 200 swords and had a certificate for each of them authenticating the swords, including I don't know if you can see a descendant of the Honami sword appraiser, Chikayoshi. Harry also found that Zelinsky made Yomiuri Shimbun in the article that you see above, where he is credited for inventing that little clip you see that clips onto chopsticks to make it easier for him and other foreign visitors to use. This will not be in the book, but just a little sidelight on one of our interesting collectors. New areas of collecting are always an exciting adventure for curators, and for me it was contemporary Japanese craft. It started in the early 1980s under the tutelage of one of your JASA's founding members, Fred Bakeland, with my first purchase of a contemporary Japanese ceramic. And I think he has been instrumental in opening up that field to many of you collectors and dealers and curators, and I want to pay tribute to his work. We have not only ceramics, but because we have a Japanese tea house, I was interested also in metalwork. And this beautiful example of Sahari copper alloy metalwork is by Iraku III, Uezumi Yasuhiko, that we were able to purchase. There's our tea house complex that many of you know, and there's also the matter of serendipity that often gets overlooked. It happened that in 2002 we had a museum trip to Japan, and Kanazawa was one of our stops, where the 58th annual Ishikawa Prefectural Museum Gendai Bijutsuten was taking place, and that piece by Mr. Uezumi was on display. And when I inquired, the curator introduced us to Mr. Uezumi, who you see on the left there with his wife on the right, and one of our fellow travelers and board members, John Medvekas, purchased the piece for the museum. So keep on traveling. I'm going to, as my last piece, show you this beautiful painting that will be in JASA's Meiji anniversary show this fall by Otake Chikuha, called Fall of the Castle. It was shown in 1902 at a Nihon Bijutsuin exhibition and won the top prize, a silver medal at that year. He was a protege of Okakura Kakuzo, and he showed in the 1900 Paris Exposition Universelle, as well as the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exhibition. Though, as I say, this was purchased in Japan. The subject is the widow of in the fallen castle, holding a knife in her hand, perhaps to cut off her hair to enter a nunnery, or perhaps to commit suicide. I think Okakura encouraged some of his artists to do so-called history paintings to recapture some of the glory of the Japanese past in the face of what he sometimes considered Western invasive art and culture. This was purchased by another businessman seeking a market in Japan, Samuel Stockton White III, in a photograph of the 1930s on the left. He studied in Cambridge, but he was in Paris in 1900, where his physique prompted Rodin to ask him to pose for two sculptures called The Athlete, that's also in the museum collection that you see on the left. I'm going to bring the proceedings back to Japan Society Your membership will probably recognize Eiko of Eiko and Koma, who happens to be the granddaughter of Otake Chikuha. In 2018, the Toyama Museum had an exhibition of his work for his 140th anniversary of his birth. And the curator there, when Eiko went to see that exhibition, told her that he thought there was a painting by her grandfather in Philadelphia. And so she called, and I invited her to come and see this painting. And she had started a series of performances called Memories of My Grandfather at the Toyama Museum, and was able to do a final section here in Philadelphia. And I hope she will be available for the Asia Society exhibition, perhaps, to recap her performance. Thank you very much. I'm turning my podium over to Xiaojin.
Good morning. Thank you again, Jessa, for this opportunity for us to talk about the collection at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And I've had about 5 months so far to study the collection. And today I picked 5 objects to tell you more about. And I've organized them by their acquisition date. I hope they will highlight some of the important moments in the museum's 125 years of collecting history, and also help us understand the collector's thinking behind each acquisition. And this is one of the first ukiyo-e prints the museum acquired through a gift of 20 prints from Elizabeth Matthews Jane in 1926. Even though the number of the prints is modest, the gift included significant works, in particular the spectacular large print by Okumura Masanobu. And one feature that makes this print so special is that it was printed on one single sheet of paper measuring 17.5 inch by 26.25 inch, the largest size for ukiyo-e prints. It's also an early example of effectively using the one-point perspective. It really draws our eyes into the picture to the focal point, which is the stage, where Danjuro II is playing one of his most famous roles, Soga Goro. And a close look rewards us with all the lively and detailed depictions of the kabuki fans in the theater. This print will be on view in an exhibition of kabuki prints from April to July. So please be sure to come see it in person. It's really impressive when you see it. Back to the collector, Elizabeth Jane, and here's a portrait of hers commissioned by her husband, Henry Jane. It was said Elizabeth didn't like the portrait, so she actually gave the portrait to a friend, and now it's in Moore's Museum. Henry was a prominent lawyer in Philadelphia, and his nephew, Horace Jane, was the museum's first curator of Asian art. Back then we called it Oriental art. And Horace was the one who brought the tea house you just saw in Felice's slides, and the Shofukuji Temple to Philadelphia. We don't know much about how or why the Janes collected Japanese prints, but their gift really jump-started the Japanese prints collection. For the curator, it no doubt helped to have a collector uncle. And for the collector uncle, it would also have been helpful to have the curator nephew's advice. So I guess that's the uncle-nephew teamwork brought this group of prints to Philadelphia. And my next pick is very special to me because it reminded me of my very first seminar in Japanese art at Princeton. That was 20-some years ago, right after these paintings were remounted in Tokyo. And that was also a time when new research on Sesshu has advanced our understanding on the artist, and lots of new works were reattributed or redated. Before the conservation, the discoloration of both the backing paper and the silk made it very difficult to see, and there isn't any signature on the painting, so they were cataloged as 17th century Edo period painting by an unknown artist. In the 1993 survey by the Tokyo Research Institute. After the conservation, the Sesshu attribution became more probable, and they were exhibited at the 2002 Sesshu exhibition in Tokyo and Kyoto, together with another 3 similar works attributed to Sesshu or Sesshu School. 2 of the 3 are currently in the Cleveland Museum of Art, formerly in the Gaunt collection, and 1 in the Rhode Island School of Design Museum. They received it as a gift in 1918. It has been suggested that all 7 paintings were originally part of a set of 8 paintings on the subject of 8 views of the Xiao and Xiang. The whereabouts of the 8th painting is unknown. The Philadelphia paintings and the Rhode Island one were purchased from Vladimir Simkovich. Simkovich was born in Russia, and after he married a Bostonian, they moved to New York City, where he taught at Columbia University until 1942. He acquainted with prominent dealers and collectors, such as John Ferguson, C.T. Liu, and John D. Rockefeller Jr. Horace Jane, the curator who acquired the Masanobu print we just saw, managed to purchase more than 300 paintings from Simkovich in 1929. All but 3 of the 300 plus are Chinese paintings. Clearly, Simkovich's primary collecting interest was Chinese painting, in particular those believed to be from the Song period. But Sesshu was an exception. Simkovich learned about Sesshu from Fenollosa's book, and he was also very much aware how much Sesshu's paintings were sold for. Probably from the dealer who sold him these paintings, he understood that they once belonged to the Date daimyo. In the 1916 Taisho 5th Date sales catalog, we found a record for a pair of 4-panel landscape screens by Sesshu. It appeared that the screens were remounted to 8 hand scrolls, and Simkovich bought it at least 5 of the 8. Those are really intriguing works when we consider the development of ink landscape painting in Japan in relation to Chinese paintings of the Song and Ming periods. They appealed to Simkovich, at least partially, because they shared some quality of what he believed to be Song paintings. The Philadelphia paintings will go up on view in our Japanese gallery this summer. And rather than giving answers as to when or by whom these paintings were painted, I hope they will raise bigger questions about the development of Japanese ink painting and also about collecting Japanese and Chinese painting in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as they did for me when I took my first seminar. And the next painting of 2 dragons will be at JASA's 50th anniversary exhibition. It was painted by Kano Hogai for Ernest Fenollosa in 1885, and it was shown at the 2nd Painting Appreciation Society exhibition, Kangankai, the following year. It was also on loan to the Cleveland Museum of Art for the inaugural exhibition of the Cleveland Museum in 1916. Even though the dragon as a painting subject dates back at least to the Song dynasty in China, Hogai's dragons have a sense of 3-dimensionality, which was not present in early paintings. This very much speaks to Fenollosa's ideal of synthesizing Japanese painting traditions with Western techniques. The painting was hung in a prominent place in Fenollosa's residence in Tokyo. Here's a photo from around 1888. I can spot at least 3 paintings by Kanohoga right here. Philadelphia received the dragon painting as a gift from Fenollosa's daughter, Brenda. When she donated it to the museum in 1940, she commissioned a brass plaque for the frame, and the inscription reads, "In memory of Ernest F. Fenollosa, for whom this picture was painted by Kanohogai." Brenda settled in Massachusetts, and there she met her future husband, who was a Philadelphian. So that's why they moved to Philadelphia, and she gave the paintings to the Philadelphia Museum that she inherited from the father. And now, let me introduce you the first major acquisition by Felice Fischer, the curator who was responsible for the remarkable growth of the collection in the past half-century. It is a hand scroll of calligraphy by 15 Zen monks of the old Bakuzen sect, including 6 of the first 7 abbots of the Monpukuji temple. It was acquired in 1977, 1 year before Stephen Addis's 1978 exhibition of old Bakuzen painting and calligraphy. So I just asked Felice this morning how she encountered this work and why she acquired it. So here's the story I heard. She went to see the famous Alice Bonney, and she was very nervous when she was going up the elevator. And Alice asked her, "What do you want to see?" And given her interest in Japanese literature and calligraphy, she said, maybe calligraphy. So Alice brought out this hand scroll of old Bakuzen calligraphy, and it was one of the 3 hand scrolls that were still intact, because as we know, the hand scrolls were often cut into hand scrolls and decorate the tea rooms. So this became really the foundation piece for the calligraphy collection in Philadelphia. And many of you have seen the exhibition of Zen painting and calligraphy from the Gitter Yellen collection, currently on view in Houston. So that's another great testament to the enduring interest in Zen painting and calligraphy. And Philadelphia's Obaku calligraphy scroll is now on view in our Japanese gallery in an exhibition titled Ink and Brush, organized by our wonderful colleague Kyoko Kinoshita. This calligraphy exhibition also includes works by Koetsu and Ike no Taiga. You can see from this installation photograph Ike no Taiga's screen. And those are also the 2 artists that Felice has organized major exhibitions around. So we also built the collection around the special exhibition or acquire major works from special exhibition. And my final pick for the top 5 is the oldest among 5, but it's the most recent acquisition. This sculpture of Kishoten is dated to around the 10th century and was acquired in 2009 in honor of Felice. It was remarkably carved from one single block of Japanese cypress, hinoki. The robe and hairdo are in a style of Chinese Tang Dynasty lady. The face in particular shows how skillful the sculptor was in capturing the benevolent and yet solemn expression of this goddess for harvest, good fortune, and happiness. The curator, collector, and honoree for this work has summarized very well some of the qualities that made this sculpture stand out. She writes, quote, The artisan has captured both the awe-inspiring dignity of a goddess and the solid, down-to-earth quality of approachable generosity, end quote. And I can say those are also the qualities that we can apply to our curator here. Xiaojin stands gracefully in the Shofukuji Temple in our Japanese gallery. The temple itself is a highlight of the collection. How the temple was acquired by and ultimately installed in the museum was a fascinating story. You could read about the temple and other 100 highlights in the book. It will be published this summer by Yale Press. And now, the +1 part of the 10+1 of our talk to review a work on my wish list. My wish list is awfully long, so to pick one work is a mission impossible. But if I get to pick one type of work that I found most fascinating, I would say it would be a work that could open a door into a new and bigger world for us. So, for example, I have Shibakokan here for you. Here's a portrait of his by Takahashi Yuichi. And the infrared photo shows there was actually another portrait, a young man underneath it. As intriguing as this portrait, Shibakokan's work encompasses a wide range of subjects, from ukiyo-e, Western print and painting, to scientific studies, and more. His work really embodies a sort of cosmopolitan mentality in early modern Japan that became an impetus for tremendous creativities. There are, of course, many challenges around the authenticities and availability of his work, but a major work of his would help us start a new area of inquiries with a global outlook. So he rose to the top of my long wish list. Thank you. Do I have time for questions? I guess we have time for just a few questions. Yes, please. Wait for the microphone.
You showed your collection at the museum of the four panels, and then there was 2 in Cleveland, and there was 1 in Rhode Island. If you put those other 3, would they be part of the same sequence of a panorama together, or were they totally distinct?
It's a set of 8 views of Xiao and Xiang, so they do have sequence. So for example, you can identify the subject of Philadelphia's 4 squirrels, like from spring to summer to autumn to winter. And the autumn one, you see the geese. Those are the descending geese. And the Cleveland and the Rhode Island one also are kind of after the 8 views of an Xiao and Xiang subject.
They do seem to be sort of connected in the panorama view, as you mentioned, also in the gun pieces.
But they're really large. They're in monumental size. So you have, the image alone would be about 5 feet tall, and they're on silk. So there are different theories. People, some scholars think maybe they were initially painted as hand scrolls and mounted as folding screen and remounted back to hand scrolls. So we are not entirely clear at the beginning what kind of format they were on. But the silk are pieced together so you can see the seam in between, because at that time you won't have such a large piece of silk.
The large size may reflect Seshu's contact with China and the Chinese scale of paintings.
So for the temple that you said was quite a story for how it got to Philadelphia and how it got inside the actual museum, care to tell the story on that, some more detail?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
There was the temple, yeah, the one that's actually inside the museum. I've been there and seen it. You said it was, at least I believe somebody said it was quite a story for how it was, I guess, purchased and taken to Philadelphia and brought inside. It does seem like it's difficult to fit through the doors and so on. So if there's any interesting stories
When the
about
museum
that.
moved to the new building in 1926, the director then was a man named Fitzkimball, who was an architectural historian. And his purpose in creating so-called period rooms was to have give the art within the collection's context. So he sent the curator Horace Jane to Japan to purchase, and China to purchase appropriate architectural structures for the museum. And we think the director of museum before Fitzkimball was actually Langdon Warner, who was in Japan in 1928 and who had hired Horace Jane. And we think it was Langdon Warner who introduced Jane to this, is from a sub-temple of Horyuji in Nara. And while the roof tiles were made in the 1950s, but all the wood elements are original. And one of the priests from Horyuji has actually come to see the temple, and it does have the signboard Shofukuji. That was the sub-temple's name. So it too, like many of the Buddhist items, was properly and legally sold to what the newspaper account called an American millionaire, Horace Jane. We wish all curators were millionaires, but
Or have an uncle, millionaire
That's
uncle. Okay, maybe one more?
So I really enjoyed your presentation, and I was most fascinated as you went through this to just think about how this history and the kind of renaissance that you're talking about in the different periods of history could relate to today. I have two small children. Oftentimes when they go to museums, I literally have watched my daughter, who's 4, try to swipe on the pictures to see what's next. It's almost like two-dimensional is not enough for them. So I guess I'm curious, for the new generation, there's an incredible interest in Japanese culture through anime and food. How do we get them interested in the originals? How do we get them to see the original art that led to what we are seeing today and then the way it's animated today? How do we bridge that gap for a digital generation?
well, since I'm the former analog generation, I'll speak to that part of how we actually use this area quite a bit for school groups and for younger generation children, because they're fascinated by the fact that this is a real house, and they look at what they do with bamboo, and in a sense it makes it real to them to be in this atmosphere. And as to the anime and future generation, I'll cede the floor to Xiaojin.
Well, I have a 7-year-old, and I have the same problem, same challenge, because I've taken her to so many museums. Now she had developed an allergy to our museums. But I often challenge her when we are in a gallery. She's now very much interested in dragons. So I ask her, oh, how many dragons can you find here? So she would go and look really closely, and we saw a big painting of George, St. George, of course, killing the dragon at the National Gallery of Art. So I asked her, can you guess what's the name of that guy? And because, you know, she knows about George and the dragon story, so she figured his name is George. So I guess you really cannot replace that kind of experience in a gallery from just an iPad or other digital mediums. So I guess, yes, my only experience is drag them into the gallery and they will discover for themselves. When I took her to the National Gallery, she was asking, where are we going to? I said, you will see. It's a very nice place, you will see. So yes, I guess as we see all the school groups in our gallery, we feel very, very encouraged and hopeful that students are still learning from the in-gallery experience.
So next time you bring your kids to Philadelphia, call Xiaojin.
Both of you, please stay to just let us thank you so much because you've set the bar very high, not just for curators, but for museum visitors. And all of us at JASA not only want to thank you and wish you tremendous success. We know, of course, Felice will have a new path in her career because there's no repressing her. And we wish Xiaojin a wonderful success in bringing her new ideas and her new scholarship to the collections. And I hope that JASA will go down to visit them and celebrate this new, very, very important publication. And I want to thank all of you who are here in New York and those who are on Zoom with us today. Our program committee, and I'd like to thank them personally, Victoria Melendez and Allison Tolman and I, felt for over 2 years we wanted to celebrate Felice Fischer and her career, and she is not shy at all, but she always was too busy to come and meet you all. But now that Xiaojin is here and they have this special publication project, we've had a chance to really delve deeply in just an hour into one of the great, great focuses on museum collections that you could endeavor to see and hear, and we want to thank you. It was really marvelous. Our program is only ending in its first section right now. We hope those of you who need to take a break, please do. And we invite the members of the Japanese Art Society to come back here in about 10 minutes when we will begin our, actually, it might be sooner, but at 12 noon we'll begin our annual meeting, which is very brief, but we have a lot of good news to cover. Thank you all at Japan Society for sharing in this program with us. It's a wonderful collaboration, and we hope that will continue into the current year. Thank you, everybody.
Sorry, I just want to make a brief point that our annual meeting is for members of the Japanese Art Society, but if you're not a member of JASA, and we've piqued your interest, and I hope we have, please stay, and you will hear about our exhibition and other things. So don't leave or disconnect. If you're interested in learning more about JASA, we will talk about that. So we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Thank you.